The following video is a Dennis the Menace production. Dennis the Menace, this name will never stick. On this episode of Is That Going to Be an Exam?, we look at user interfaces. There are many different types of user interfaces being used by companies and people with personal computers. There are three main types of different interfaces, and they are GUI, which is graphical user interface, CLI, which is command line interface, and MDI, which is menu driven interface. And we're going to take a deeper look into all three of these interfaces in the next few slides. The first type of user interface we're going to look at is GUI, otherwise known as graphical user interfaces. Graphical user interfaces utilizes visual buttons, menus, icons, and windows to represent different parts of the computer, such as like a camera, monitor, or stuff like that, and it allows you just to click on and go to. The GUI is usually controlled by a pointing device, such as a mouse, where you're allowed to move it around and point and click onto what you want. However, it could be anything ranging from a mouse to a motion tracker pad. It's considered the easiest to operate, especially for people with limited computer experience, since it just involves looking at pictures with labels on them and pointing and clicking. So therefore, it's considered the easiest to operate. The next type of user interface we're going to look at is CLI, otherwise known as command line interface. And a command line interface interaction between the user and the computer takes place solely through typing commands. Depending on the command given, several parameters can be set, such as which files you want your action to take place within. So we're going to look at CLI versus GUI now. GUI, as we stated earlier, was a little bit easier for people with limited computer experience to work with, whereas CLI is going to be a little bit more difficult for them to work with because it requires a little bit of knowledge of computers and how the language you have to type to tell it is. Because you can't just type in regular words. You have to use the computer language, so you have to know certain keystrokes and everything to make sure everything works properly. And CLI is not commonly used today, although it was one of the first user interfaces created, and it was very common then. Due to things such as GUI, it's not used anymore since it's a little bit more complicated to understand. However, it still is used today for when certain actions need to take place throughout several different types of files. That way it's just a little bit easier to, instead of having GUI go in and do it for each file. If you use CLI, it can all be done at one step if you know how to do it correctly. So that's the reason CLI is still used today instead of just GUI. It still has a purpose in today's world. In today's world, there are several key parts of a CLI being used, the first of which is a terminal. A terminal is a command prompt which allows the command line interface to be used. So you can go into your computer, instead of using the GUI, if you go to the terminal and the command prompt, you're able to start using CLI instead if that's what you decided to do. Another aspect of CLI is a wildcard. A wildcard is a character that, while you are writing in the CLI, it acts as different characters. So an example would be in the Windows command prompts, a question mark and the star represent several different things. So instead of typing out everything, you're able to use that wildcard, and it represents what you were wanting to convey to the computer easily and quicker. The final type of user interface we're going to look at is MDI, or menu-driven interface. Menu-driven interfaces allow the user to make selections from a series of predetermined options. So an example of this would be an ATM. If you think about it, when you go to an ATM, there are several options that you have to pick from, such as debit, credit, cash, all that. And then after you select a certain option, it'll take you to a new page where if you selected cash, for example, it'll give you different amounts to withdraw. And then you make a selection there, and it'll take you to another page asking if you want a receipt or anything. So in that instance, those are all the different predetermined options that are in a series that allow you to easily convey what you want the computer to do. So different menus are presented to users based on their response to previous windows, as we said with ATM, and you can see in the picture here, based on your response to different ones, there are several different menus that are present for new ones that you can do, which makes it a little bit easier for people to go through and find what they need to exactly while it's still all organized correctly. And these are the sources I used. Once again, thanks for watching a Dennis the Menace production. Dennis the Menace Productions. I can't believe that name stuck.